The anime begins by introducing a student named Wataru, who has admired Aika ever since middle school. Apparently, Wataru has confessed his feelings multiple times, but each time, he was rejected. One day, while trying to approach her on the way to school, a ball nearly hit his face. This moment snapped Wataru out of his fantasy, making him realize that he was not worthy of Aika. As a result, even though he had chased her for years, Wataru decided to give up. From that moment on, Wataru became calmer and acted more maturely. His friends, who were used to seeing him always sticking to Aika, were confused about what had happened to him. During a break, Aika assumed that Wataru would follow her as usual. However, Wataru only went to the restroom and left her without a second thought. Unexpectedly, being ignored by Wataru made Aika feel uneasy. She seemed lonely because Wataru no longer invited her to eat at the snack bar like he used to. Later, while Wataru was eating alone outside, a girl named Aizawa approached him. She acted overly familiar with Wataru, even though they didn't know each other well before. The next day, Aizawa approached Wataru again in class. This surprised his friends, as Wataru was now seen with another girl besides Aika. At the same time, Aika was clearly unhappy when she saw this. Seeing another girl getting close to Wataru made Aika frown the whole day. During physical education, Aika's close friend Ashita came over to greet Wataru. She took the opportunity to mention that Aizawa was known to be affectionate with her boyfriend from their second-year class. After hearing this, Wataru began observing Aizawa's boyfriend, curious about why she kept approaching him. Later, when Aizawa came to the class again, Ashita asked her to share the story behind her breakup. She also teased Aizawa's ex-boyfriend, implying that Aizawa had moved on to pursue Wataru. Unexpectedly, Ashita's remarks offended Aizawa, who then quickly left. Seeing this, Wataru immediately ran after her. In his hurry, Wataru bumped into a girl carrying a stack of documents. When he finally caught up with Aizawa in the school's back garden, Wataru apologized on behalf of Ashita for offending her. Wataru truly didn't expect his friend to say something like that. As they sat together, Aizawa explained the reason why she broke up with her boyfriend. It turned out, her boyfriend once mentioned that Aika was his type, which hurt her deeply, leading to their breakup. Not only that, the reason she approached Wataru was to ease her heartbreak by getting back at her ex. After hearing her story, Wataru shared his own experience in love. Before meeting Aika, he had been harshly rejected by someone. To make matters worse, the boyfriend of the girl he liked came and hit him, causing him to fall. During this time, Aika suddenly stepped in and resolved the issue, even scolding them for insulting Wataru. As a result, the heartbroken Wataru instantly fell in love with Aika at that moment. Hearing Wataru's story cheered Aizawa up, therefore she promised she wouldn't mess with Wataru anymore. After school, Aika suddenly came to Wataru's house to ask what had happened to him, as he had stopped chasing her lately. In response to her question, Wataru confessed his feelings, but Aika rejected him once again, saying it was impossible for her to accept him now. Because of this, Wataru believed that by distancing himself, Aika wouldn't be bothered by him anymore. However, this only made Aika feel even lonelier, as Wataru had always been around her since their first year, leaving her with little chance to talk to other students, so no one else approached her. After hearing this from Ashita, Wataru thought he should help make Aika more popular. When thinking about this outside the classroom, a senior named Shinomiya suddenly approached him, wanting to talk, as Wataru had apparently scared her friend. Shinomiya was the well-known chair of the disciplinary committee at school. During their conversation in the counseling room, Shinomiya was convinced that Wataru had no ill intentions toward her friend, who turned out to be the girl he had bumped into earlier. That girl was Yu, a hardworking member of the disciplinary committee, known for doing her duties well. However, due to her lack of confidence, even small mistakes caused her to panic. At that moment, Shinomiya felt helpless, unable to assist Yu, and asked Wataru for his opinion. Wataru suggested that Yu would likely feel reassured if she was encouraged with a pat on the shoulder. His reasoning was that Shinomiya was someone Yu admired and looked up to. After hearing his advice, Shinomiya asked for his name. Not wanting to get involved with her further, Wataru introduced himself using his friend's name. The next day, Wataru was asked by his older sister, Kade, to bring some items to school. However, Kade suddenly decided to carry them herself, so her brother could go to school with Aika. When they arrived at school, Ashita informed Wataru and Aika that the chair of the disciplinary committee was furious in their class. At that time, Shinomiya wanted to invite Wataru to the counseling room, but had trouble because he had given her a false name. When Wataru went to the counseling room, Shinomiya questioned why he had lied to her. Wataru then bluntly explained that if the chair of the disciplinary committee knew his real name, he had a feeling it would only bring bad luck. Even though his answer was frustrating, Shinomiya didn't mind his reasoning, but she couldn't accept what Wataru had done, as it inconvenienced his own friend. However, that wasn't the main issue. The reason Wataru was invited was because Yu wanted to clear up a misunderstanding between them. Unexpectedly, when Wataru bumped into her while carrying something heavy, Yu felt guilty for leaving so quickly and ignoring his offer to help. Later, when Wataru returned to class, he saw Aika surrounded by her friends. Aika was showing them a picture of her younger sister, Eri, and they instantly crowded around her, captivated by how adorable her sister looked. Feeling like he would only be a bother, Wataru hesitated to join Aika. Besides, he also had to go to the student council room, as he was summoned by her sister, who was the vice president of the council. Since summer was approaching, Kade forced Wataru to help them handle the paperwork for the school's homecoming event. In short, after showing the picture of Eri, Aika's classmates expressed their desire to visit her house. Thinking that Wataru might join them, Aika warned him not to get too close to Eri. However, Wataru misunderstood and thought he wasn't allowed to come to her house, when in fact, Aika had intended to invite him. When summer arrived, Wataru was mesmerized by Aika wearing her summer uniform. Still, Wataru didn't want to approach her, afraid of ruining the mood. Besides, there were already many people eager to talk with Aika. As her close friend, Ashita wanted Wataru to talk to Aika again, but Wataru refused, believing it was for her own good. After their physical education class, Wataru was suddenly approached by his classmate, Sasaki. At that moment, Sasaki mentioned to Wataru how adorable Aika's younger sister, Eri, was. He even showed Wataru a photo from when he visited Aika's house during the recent holiday. After seeing the picture, Wataru sent it to Sasaki's younger sibling, which caused his sibling to feel jealous, as they had a strong affection for their older brother. Shortly after, Wataru received a message from Kade, telling him not to come to the student council room that day, since there wasn't much work to do. As a result, Wataru then grabbed his lunch and ate alone in the classroom. However, his classmate, Yamazaki, suddenly came over and invited him to eat with Koga and some other girls. While eating, Koga and the others asked Wataru about his relationship with Aika, noting how they hadn't seen them arguing like a married couple recently. However, Wataru immediately clarified that he didn't even know where Aika lived, to which they jokingly called him a failed husband. Not long after, Aika suddenly interrupted their conversation. She then pulled Wataru aside, visibly upset. Aika was angry at Wataru for chatting with the other girls. At that moment, Wataru thought Aika might be jealous, but she quickly denied it and walked away. Later, while Wataru was in class, the student council president, Rinji, approached him and invited him to talk. This time, Rinji wanted to discuss Kade, who seemed to be in a bad mood. According to Rinji, Kade's mood might have been affected by Wataru's recent change in behavior. As a result, Rinji then suggested that Wataru meet Kade on the rooftop to talk things over directly. When Wataru arrived on the rooftop, Kade immediately asked why he was there. Wataru explained that the chair of the disciplinary committee wouldn't be coming, and that Rinji had lied to get him there, claiming that Kade was upset. Kade denied being upset, but Wataru then asked her to name 10 of his strengths as a brother and 10 of his flaws. Kade thought Wataru had no particular strengths, but when asked about his flaws, she could list more than 10 without hesitation. This made Wataru realize that these were her sister's true feelings, as she saw him as an ordinary person with many shortcomings. Afterward, Kade explained why she had been worried about Wataru. It turned out Kade didn't want him to become frustrated over being unable to forget the person he liked. Kade also admitted that she had never supported him and had always been cold toward him. Because of this, She promised to be more careful not to hurt her brother's feelings again. However, Wataru reassured her that he didn't want that. Therefore, he asked Kade not to change her attitude and to remain his strict, caring older sister. Unexpectedly, Aika had been eavesdropping on their conversation. Realizing that Wataru had spoken harshly to his sister, she immediately stepped out to scold him. With her intervention, the relationship between the siblings returned to normal. After that incident, Aika and Ashita stopped by a cafe. While at the cafe, Ashita asked why Aika had followed Wataru, as she thought that her actions were excessive. However, Aika herself didn't understand why she had acted that way. She only knew that she had felt uneasy ever since Wataru stopped pursuing her. Hearing this, Ashita suggested that maybe Aika had come to rely on Wataru, and now it was her turn to be honest with him. The next day, Kade commented on Wataru's messy hair, telling him to dye it properly because it looked sloppy. However, since Wataru had stopped chasing after Aika, he no longer cared about his appearance. Not only that, after the previous day's events, Wataru felt a bit awkward around Aika. Fortunately, Ashita was always there to lighten the mood between them. In short, Wataru wasn't asked to help the student council that day, so as usual, he planned to eat alone outside the classroom. But as he was about to prepare his lunch, Senior Shinomiya offered him a seat. Additionally, Yu invited him to join them for lunch. Wataru was surprised by Yu's new attitude, which was more confident and less fearful around boys. Shinomiya then explained that it was all thanks to Wataru's advice. Yu had gained confidence and was now brave enough to take steps forward. When Wataru returned to class, Sasaki immediately complained to him. Ever since Wataru sent the picture of Eri to his sibling, Sasaki's sibling had been constantly pestering him wherever he went. Hearing this, Wataru jokingly said it was Sasaki's own fault for getting close to Eri. Sasaki then revealed that he wasn't interested in Eri, but in Aika. At that moment, Wataru admitted that he still liked Aika too, but he wouldn't stand in his way because he had no right to. For now, Wataru would just support them from afar. After school, Wataru saw Aika walking with Sasaki. Later, when Wataru went to retrieve his shoes, Aika suddenly approached him without any clear reason. Caught up in the moment, Wataru offered to accompany her. Coincidentally, Aika needed his help to pick up something she had left behind. On the way, Aika asked Wataru what he had been doing during lunch, to which Wataru replied that he had eaten with members of the disciplinary committee, Senior Shinomiya and Yu. Upon hearing this, Aika immediately asked what his relationship with them was. Wataru explained that they were his seniors and also friends of his sister, Kade. From this answer, Aika felt relieved and stopped questioning him further. On their way home, Aika suggested that Wataru should tidy up his hair color. Wataru then asked for her opinion on what color would suit him best. After observing him for a moment, Aika replied that any color would look good. However, she mentioned that if his hair hadn't been brown at the time, she might not have greeted him. After their conversation, Wataru immediately bought some hair dye and, with Kade's help, dyed his hair. In the past, Wataru had done more than just dye his hair to get closer to the girl he liked. Not only that, he had also studied hard and earned high marks in his exams. But since he had lost his motivation, his grades had become average. One day, while others were chatting at Aika's seat, Wataru quietly left the room, acting as if he didn't care. This made people think something was wrong with him. Later, as Wataru was returning to class, he encountered a group of girls watching Aika from outside. Without hesitation, Wataru asked them if they needed anything from Aika. Suddenly, someone called out from behind, startling one of the girls, causing her to scream. One of the girls then arrogantly claimed to be a noble in front of Wataru. In response, Wataru mocked her, leaving the girl visibly annoyed. On another day, Wataru and Aika walked to school together in the rain. When a car passed by a puddle, Wataru quickly used his umbrella to shield Aika from the splash, getting himself soaked instead. As a result, by the time Wataru arrived in class, he started feeling unwell and even fell asleep during the lesson. Fortunately, the teacher understood his condition. Since his fever hadn't improved, Wataru asked for permission to go to the school infirmary. However, as he was on his way there, Wataru suddenly collapsed. This worried Aika and her friends. Even after Wataru was taken to the infirmary, Aika couldn't stop thinking about him. Shortly after, Shinomiya came looking for Wataru in class. Upon hearing that Wataru had fallen ill, she immediately informed Kade and planned to visit him. In the afternoon, Ashita and Aika also came to visit him again. However, since Wataru was still unwell, he didn't want them to come too close or for Aika to touch him. Wataru explained that he didn't want to spread his illness, as he didn't want Aika to get sick. Besides the two of them, Kade and Shinomiya also came to visit Wataru. Upon arriving, they immediately checked on Wataru by feeling his temperature directly. The next day, Wataru didn't come to school, and he suddenly stopped replying to Aika's messages. This made Aika worry about him, so she asked Ashita to visit Wataru with her. When Aika and Ashita arrived at his house, they found out that Wataru was already feeling better. He had simply fallen asleep and hadn't had a chance to reply to her messages. At that moment, Ashita mentioned that it was Aika who suggested visiting him. Unexpectedly, Aika didn't deny this, but too embarrassed to admit it, so she quickly made up excuses to leave Wataru's house. The following day, Wataru found himself dealing again with the blonde girl from before. Her name was Marika. It turned out that Marika wanted to talk to Aika and ask for her support in the upcoming student council elections, as Marika planned to make Aika her vice president. However, Wataru strongly opposed this idea, believing it would only backfire. His reasoning was that Aika was too appealing, and people would end up supporting her more than Marika. Naturally, Marika was annoyed by his comment, while Aika blushed upon hearing it. Sometime later, before the semester break, Wataru looked for a part-time job and eventually found work at a used bookstore. The next day, during class, Wataru found himself unable to focus on the lesson. He couldn't understand any of the material the teacher was explaining. When buying food in the cafeteria, Yu suddenly invited Wataru to join them for lunch. Yu had already heard about his condition from Shinomiya, and she wanted to check if he had fully recovered. Besides checking on his recovery, Shinomiya revealed that they had a specific reason for inviting Wataru. Essentially, they wanted him to join the disciplinary committee. Unfortunately, Wataru didn't feel he was fit for the position. Even though they really needed him, Wataru still refused to join. Yu then tried to convince him by holding both of his hands, but this only led to their friends becoming angry and stopping them. Wataru then used this situation as an opportunity to further refuse their request. After Wataru was punished by his seniors, Aika asked him why one side of his hair was so messy. Noticing that Wataru was having trouble fixing it, Aika spontaneously helped him tidy it up. Shortly after, the disciplinary committee and the student council announced that the school would be hosting the homecoming festival. As a result, every class was asked to help prepare for the event. When it came time to choose class representatives for the festival, no one in Wataru's class volunteered. Therefore, the homeroom teacher selected students who were not part of any extracurricular activities to come forward. They were then asked to play rock, paper, scissors to randomly choose two representatives. In the end, Aika and a girl named Ichinose were chosen to represent their class. However, Sasaki suddenly volunteered to replace Ichinose, with the intention of spending more time with Aika during the holiday. This made Wataru feel a little jealous, but he didn't dwell on it since he had his own plans. On the first day of the holiday, Wataru began working at the bookstore. While cleaning outside, he happened to see a young boy being bullied by a group of students. Wataru didn't ignore the situation and quickly stepped in to help the boy, contacting their family afterward. Soon after, the boy's older sister arrived to pick them up. After Wataru explained what had happened, she immediately thanked him with a warm and gentle demeanor. At home, Wataru thought the girl might be a university student. Just by looking at her, he felt something new stir within him. Not only that, the girl was the complete opposite of his sister, who was rough and lazy, though Kade still cared about him. During their conversation, Kade suddenly suggested Wataru to run for student council for his own benefit. On a different day, the university student came to the bookstore to see Wataru again, and her name was Fuka. This time, she wanted to properly introduce herself and express her gratitude. On another occasion, Wataru and Fuka went to the beach together. The atmosphere around the beach was incredibly soothing. However, despite the calming surroundings, Fuka warned Wataru that the wind was strong and could dry out their hair, making it difficult to manage. Before they went to the beach, Fuka stopped by the bookstore to chat with Wataru. She arrived wearing a fashionable outfit and handmade accessories. When Wataru complimented her accessories, Fuka mentioned that she had recently made them with her father. This surprised Wataru, since most university girls he knew weren't usually close with their fathers. Not only that, Wataru also found the accessories fascinating and wanted to try making something similar as a birthday gift for Aika. When Fuka learned that Wataru also planned to make accessories, she became excited and wanted to join him. Seeing her bright, eager expression, Wataru couldn't refuse her. So, they decided to go together. However, when they arrived at the train station, Fuka suddenly became self-conscious about her outfit. Fuka explained that she used to wear fashionable clothes in elementary school, but her friends often made comments and told her to change. Hearing this, Wataru felt even more confused, thinking about all sorts of things, but still managed to give her a compliment that made her smile. On the other hand, Aika and Ashido were planning to go to the beach. At one point, they considered inviting Wataru as well, but they ultimately decided not to. At the same time, Wataru and Fuka got closer to the store, which made her grow more excited, and without realizing it, she leaned against Wataru. Once inside the store, Wataru found himself to be the only male customer, surrounded by older women. This made Wataru feel even more nervous, like a naive child. When it was time to choose materials for making accessories, Wataru carefully selected his items, wanting to create the perfect necklace for Aika. Seeing this, Fuka couldn't help but wonder if the gift was for someone he liked. Fuka then commented that Wataru's girlfriend would surely love receiving a gift from him. However, Wataru honestly explained that Aika wasn't his girlfriend. Although he liked her, Aika hadn't accepted his feelings yet. Still, the moments he spent with her were never wasted. If Wataru had never liked Aika, he believed he wouldn't have been able to grow as a person. Therefore, for his own satisfaction, he wanted to give her a gift. Hearing this, Fuka smiled warmly, saying that anyone would be happy to receive a gift. Meanwhile, Aika was enjoying the beach with her younger sister and best friend. While taking a break, they noticed a craft store and decided to check it out before heading home. On the other side, after considering his materials, Wataru chose to make an accessory using seashells. However, just as he began, his attention was caught by a picture of Fuka wearing a middle school uniform. At first, Wataru thought Fuka was into cosplay, but it turned out that the uniform was actually from her middle school. At that moment, Fuka remembered she hadn't properly introduced herself earlier, so she reintroduced herself as Fuka from Rohama Girls Middle School. Upon hearing this, Wataru was completely shocked, realizing that Fuka was still in middle school. Confused and unsure how to process this, Wataru focused on cutting the seashell with all his might. Unfortunately, time ran out before they could finish the necklace, and they had to leave. The next morning, Wataru returned to his job at the bookstore. He had initially planned to work there only for the summer break, so the manager mentioned that he would start hiring a new employee soon and had already posted a job opening. Sometime later, Ichinose, one of Wataru's classmates, came into the store. She had seen the recruitment poster outside the door and intended to apply. Unexpectedly, the manager had known her for a long time, as Ichinose was a regular customer who always made him enthusiastic. Without hesitation, when Ichinose handed in her application, the manager immediately accepted it. After that, Ichinose was introduced to the manager's wife, who would explain her job responsibilities. However, because Ichinose's bangs were covering part of her face, the manager's wife suggested trimming them first. Seeing how nervous Ichinose was, Wataru quickly stepped in to stop her. Even though they were in the same class, Wataru reintroduced himself since they weren't that close. He then suggested that Ichinose tidy her hair herself before having it cut. As a more experienced employee, Wataru explained the tasks they needed to handle, from organizing books to assisting customers. Although there were many books, Ichinose managed to handle it well. However, Wataru was concerned about her ability to assist customers since she was very shy and spoke little. Therefore, Ichinose was first trained on how to use the cash register before interacting with customers. Not long after, a difficult customer came in to buy books, and the experience overwhelmed Ichinose to the point of tears. This made Wataru worry about whether Ichinose could handle the job on her own after he left. Concerned, Wataru discussed it with the manager. At that moment, Wataru confidently stated that Ichinose wasn't suited for the job, but the manager disagreed, accusing him of judging her too quickly. Upon further reflection, Wataru realized that Ichinose likely considered the bookstore an important place, so he decided to talk to her directly. When speaking with Ichinose, Wataru reassured her that no one is perfect when they first start a job. However, he also made it clear that if she wasn't willing to serve customers from the beginning, this might not be the right place for her. Because of this, Ichinose thought Wataru was going to fire her, so she pleaded with him not to and promised to improve. Since Wataru was only an intern and didn't have the authority to fire anyone, he quickly calmed her down and regretted his earlier words. That evening, Ashita invited Aika and Wataru to a video call. During the call, Wataru shared everything that had happened at work. After listening, Aika reassured him that none of it was his fault. She added that if Ichinose had better communication skills, things wouldn't have been so complicated. The next day, Ichinose explained the reason she needed to work. Apparently, she used to be very close to her older brother, Ichigo, but they stopped talking after Ichigo brought his girlfriend, Yuri, home. Wanting to become independent from Ichigo, Ichinose decided to take the job. After hearing this, Wataru assumed that Ichinose felt awkward around her brother. It turned out Ichinose still wanted his attention, but couldn't get it now that he had a girlfriend. This caused her anxiety and the need to do something to take her mind off it. Because of this, Wataru acknowledged her strong determination and encouraged Ichinose to keep pushing forward together with him. Not long after, Fuka visited the bookstore. At that moment, Wataru introduced Ichinose to Fuka as his classmate and fellow employee. Since it had been a while since he last saw Fuka, Wataru wanted to chat with her for a while. However, he couldn't because he was focused on training Ichinose. Since Fuka and Ichinose both loved reading, Wataru thought they might become good friends. So, he made an effort to help them connect, sharing each of their hobbies. Wataru also allowed Ichinose to chat with Fuka, reminding her to only focus on work when customers were around. This way, Ichinose, who was usually quiet, could make a new friend. Before Fuka left, Wataru had an idea to help train Ichinose by simulating customer service. During this time, Fuka played the role of a customer while Ichinose practiced assisting her. After completing the exercise, Fuka headed home, while Wataru and Ichinose continued working until the store closed. Not long after, at home, Wataru couldn't stop thinking about Ichinose's situation. The thoughts weighed heavily on him, distracting him so much that he accidentally put salt in Keide's coffee. Despite his distractions, over time, Ichinose gradually became more comfortable with her job. However, she still hadn't moved past the hurt from when Ichigo brought his girlfriend home. One day, as Ichinose was about to leave work, Ichigo came to see her. He suddenly invited her to eat and hang out like they used to, but Ichinose refused, looking frightened, and hid behind Wataru. As a result, to avoid further misunderstandings, Wataru suggested they talk it out somewhere else. Once they arrived at a cafe, Ichigo apologized to Wataru for his earlier behavior and then apologized to his sister, inviting her to spend time with him like before. Feeling as though her place had been taken by Ichigo's girlfriend, Ichinose declined. In response, Ichigo called Yuri over to help him persuade his sister. At that moment, Yuri explained that Ichigo was deeply worried about her. Additionally, since Ichinose was struggling with her shy personality, Yuri suggested that it might be too soon for her to be working and advised her to quit the job. Unexpectedly, Wataru expressed that Ichinose had been doing a good job at work. He believed that Ichinose chose this path because she had already accepted her brother's relationship. Moreover, Wataru reminded everyone that Ichinose was no longer a child and had the right to make her own decisions. Some time later, when Wataru was watering the garden, Fuka approached him to say hello. Despite being told about it, Wataru still found it hard to believe that Fuka was only in middle school. Later, when they gathered at the store, Fuka lent a book to Ichinose, which piqued her interest since she had wanted to read it for a long time. As Wataru was organizing items in the store, he received a message from one of his classmates informing him that their class representatives were attending a meeting at school. Along with the message from his friend, Kade also texted him, saying she needed to discuss something with him. When Wataru got home, Kade mentioned that if he had some free time, she wanted his help with the upcoming homecoming festival. Even though the class representatives were already assigned, their role was to supervise the middle school students, while Shinomiya's team was short on people for the more labor-intensive tasks. Because of this, Kade didn't want to owe Shinomiya a favor, especially after her brother had refused the invitation to join the disciplinary committee. After being persuaded, Wataru agreed to help, so Kade handed him her phone so he could contact Shinomiya. However, when Wataru offered to help, Shinomiya declined. Despite this, Wataru didn't give up. To convince her, he jokingly suggested they meet in person to discuss it. This sudden proposal made Shinomiya blush. Although Wataru had meant it as a joke, it turned out to be effective in getting her to agree. The following day, Shinomiya explained all the tasks that needed to be done. She said that the student council and class representatives were responsible for guiding visitors, while the disciplinary committee was in charge of transporting logistics and preparing the venue. The problem was that most of the committee members were girls, and although there were enough members, Shinomiya wanted to minimize any risks for her team. When Wataru met the other members of the disciplinary committee, Ichigo thanked him right away. Apparently, thanks to Wataru, his quiet sister had recently become more cheerful than before. Before heading home, one of Aika's friends invited her to watch a match. However, Aika declined, explaining that she had to take care of her younger sibling. Giving such a reason reminded Aika of her past. Back then, when her friends invited her to play, Aika often declined. This led to her being isolated and avoided by her peers. Later, when Wataru slipped in the cafeteria, Aika immediately rushed over to help him, as no one else did. This simple act of kindness made Wataru develop feelings for her, but Aika couldn't reciprocate because she didn't have time for a relationship. From that moment on, Wataru started spending more time around her. He even studied diligently just to attend the same high school as Aika. Although his behavior was sometimes annoying, having Wataru around eased the weight on Aika's shoulders. However, recently, Wataru had stopped approaching her as often. This made Aika feel quite lonely. So, when she sensed his presence at school, she immediately ran off to find him. After searching the school grounds, Aika finally found Wataru. In her haste, she wasn't paying attention and accidentally bumped into him. Wataru asked her why she seemed to be in such a rush. Blushing, Aika admitted that she had seen him and quickly ran to catch up. Wataru then asked why she had done that, but Aika turned the question back on him, asking why he hadn't greeted her lately. Wataru apologized, explaining that he had been very busy and hadn't had much time recently. He then asked Aika what she had been doing during the break. In response, Aika mentioned that she had recently gone to the beach with Ashita and Eri. This reminded Wataru of the picture of Aika that had been sent to him. Even though Aika had asked Ashita to delete the photo, she wanted to check his phone to make sure he didn't still have it. As they reached for the phone, they accidentally ended up holding hands. Shortly afterward, Ashita greeted them both. Noticing that Wataru's skin was slightly tanned, Ashita became curious about what he had been doing every day. At that moment, Wataru nearly slipped up by mentioning he had gone to the beach with a middle school girl, but to stay on the safe side. He said that Kade had asked him to help with school preparations. Aika then asked if Wataru would be coming to school again. If so, she wanted to meet him after the homecoming festival was over. The next day, students from various middle schools gathered in the school auditorium to listen to a welcome speech from the student council president, which introduced them to the school. After the speech, Sasaki and Aika were tasked with guiding students from Rohama Middle School. During introductions, one of the students asked about the relationship between Wataru and Aika, to which she replied that Wataru was just her classmate and politely asked them not to ask personal questions. As they continued the tour, Aika and Sasaki began explaining the school's facilities and rules to the visitors. The students seemed particularly interested in the fact that the rules weren't too strict and the uniforms were stylish. Some of the girls even expressed a desire to attend the school because they idolized the head of the disciplinary committee, Shinomiya. During the tour, a group of boys from another middle school started teasing Aizawa, who was guiding them. As a result, Aika boldly stepped in and scolded them, reminding them to respect their seniors. However, instead of backing down, The boys were captivated by her beauty. To make sure her words were taken seriously, Aika firmly told them that people with attitudes like theirs weren't fit to attend this school. She added that they were there to guide them, not to entertain them. Shortly after, Fuka spotted Wataru walking by. Without hesitation, she excitedly called out to him and approached him with great enthusiasm. In her excitement, Fuka and her friend accidentally revealed the time she and Wataru had spent together at the beach. Hearing this, Aika remarked that if Wataru had time to hang out with others, he should come spend time with her as well. Unexpectedly, Aika suddenly invited Wataru to visit her home. On a different day, Aika visited Wataru at his workplace. It was pouring rain outside, so Wataru quickly invited her in to dry off. Not long after, Fuka also arrived, drenched from the rain. Seeing Aika already in the store, Fuka greeted her politely, not caring that she was soaked. To keep Fuka from catching a cold, Ichinose suggested she use the changing room, while Wataru stayed behind to watch the store. At that moment, Aika was surprised to see how close Fuka and Ichinose were. Wataru explained that Fuka often visited and that she and Ichinose bonded over their shared love of books. Aika then asked Wataru if he was sure he didn't want to join them. Smiling, Wataru teased her by saying that if he did, Aika might end up alone. Flustered, Aika lost her balance and almost fell, but Wataru quickly caught her, creating a dramatic moment between them. Sometime later, in their free time, Wataru and Ashita finally visited Aika's house. To his surprise, Aika's younger sister, Eri, took an immediate liking to him and stuck close to him the entire time. Eri even jumped on him, something she had never done before. Wanting to be a good guest, Wataru went along with whatever Eri wanted. While playing with her was fun, Wataru eventually became exhausted from trying to keep up with her energy. Not long after, Eri's mother came home. It was Wataru's first time meeting her, but since Aika had already talked about him, her mother instantly recognized him. Embarrassed by this, Aika quickly walked Wataru home, but promised to invite him over again sometime. As she walked him home, Aika shared that lately, she had been enjoying her school life more, even though she used to be alone with few friends to talk to. Wataru assumed that this was his fault and apologized to Aika, saying he wouldn't bother her anymore. However, Aika clarified that she didn't blame him. In fact, she believed that because Wataru was always around her, things had changed for the better. For Aika, Wataru had become someone she could rely on. She then asked him to talk to her like he used to, as she didn't want to feel anxious from losing him. From that night, Wataru felt he was getting closer to his dream. Though he had once considered giving up, his feelings had finally reached her. Moral lesson from the story: if you can't focus in class, just blame it on your part-time job. It makes everything blurry, even your grades. And when someone holds your hands to convince you, just use it as the perfect excuse to awkwardly dodge any responsibilities.